The Death of Superman is a 2018 American direct-to-video animated film based on the 1992 comic storyline of the same name. As a frequently comic-adjacent person, I was passingly familiar with this story, which isn't a particularly notable thing. I've always found myself in the orbit of a comic person. In 1992, that person was just about everyone. This story showed up on the news. Anyway, it was enough to get the broad outline. There's a tough alien named Doomsday. No one else in the Justice League can handle him. Only Superman can stop him. They fight. They punch each other so hard the impact shatters all the windows. Superman stops Doomsday, and also he dies. You know, just the basics. I figured there were all sorts of things I was missing that made up the story itself. I'm not an avid comic follower, but I do like a lot of these characters, so I indulge in movies, and cartoons, and games and the like. And after Doomsday appeared in a wretched movie, I heard one critic specifically question the use of the characters, since he was not really a character, just an empty plot device created simply to justify Superman being killed. I figured there was at least a little hyperbole in this, you know, like some absolute truth, but also some 90s backlash and antipathy towards the character. Kind of like how some fans talk about characters like Venom. So when I finally saw the animated movie that purported to be a faithful adaptation of the story, I was blown away to discover, no, it wasn't hyperbole at all. The basics I knew, that's all that was there. Doomsday shows up, like literally drops out of the sky and starts walking. And that's the extent of his villainous plan. Walk and kill things. Seriously, that is it. He's not even there for Superman or because of Superman. He doesn't even know Superman. It was actually sort of astounding. I think maybe he's supposed to seem more akin to a natural disaster like a storm, except it has a face so Superman can punch it. But I'd argue he has less personality than a storm because at least storms are ominous and can fill you with awe and dread. Doomsday is just a big guy. And it's weird. This is the most famous Superman story, and it doesn't feel like one. It feels closer to stories that get the character wrong. The kind they're all focused on how he is the hardest punching, the strongest, the most indestructiblest, and not on the things that make Superman meaningful to so many fans. The core of this story is a fistfight with an ugly monster, not, being Superman. Saving people, helping people, even inspiring people. Sure, Doomsday's killing people, it needs to be stopped, but it's not about that in any meaningful way. There's nothing like this. From All-Star Superman number 10, Never Ending, by Grant Morrison, art by Frank Quitely and Jamie Grant. Maybe the most famous page of the character in the modern day. Stuff like this is what people respond to, his resolve in helping others and capacity to do so. Superman isn't my absolute favorite superhero. He's up there, but he's not my favorite. But the absence of this critical element of the character in The Death of Superman did get me thinking about my favorite. So, the movie wasn't a total loss. I will get right to the point. The superhero I'm talking about is Max Caulfield, who first appeared in the 2015 game Life is Strange. Surely you can imagine a bevy of genre lawyers screeching at once that she isn't a superhero, no, like from the comics. To which I can only say, ha, owned. More fairly though, I might be accused of abusing the plasticity of the genre. Max is a teen drama protagonist. There's just a lot of supernatural bleed into that genre these days. And yeah, I'm totally abusing that plasticity. Life is Strange is a pretty wild gumbo, but superheroes are in that gumbo, and at the very least you'd have to concede she'd fit in pretty easily with the X-Men. But consider some of Max's classic trope bona fides. She has a legit superpower with a dynamic pose that instantly tells you she's using that power, and it has an intended critical weakness. She has an iconic outfit and a codename, in a sense. She has an established setting where she operates and a lair that serves as both a refuge and a base of operations. She has an extended cast that includes charming allies and a colorful rogues gallery of adversaries who constitute different varieties and levels of danger. And she has a sidekick, a damsel who is regularly distressed, and a nemesis who is her opposite number in nearly every way, yet with whom she shares a profound connection. She even has a theme. Oh yeah, and she doesn't like bullies or guns. Also, Max probably counts as a superhero because that's what everyone in the story calls her. Now granted, a lot of that is, well, how else would Max and Chloe process what's happening to her? 25 years ago, they'd have said she was an X-File. But still, so many characters make reference to Max being a superhero that it feels like more than just a reference. We're being asked to consider her as a superhero, not in the sense we should rank her alongside Superman or Spider-Man, but in the sense that we should consider this a commentary on the concept. This ends up putting Max more on the super continuum side with things like the film Super or Kick-Ass, or even all the current rage, The Boys, which probably seems like an even wilder claim. What sort of commentary is Max making anyway? Well, I'll get to it. So, Max is a high school senior. She attends an arts program at a prestigious private school. She's a photographer, a very gifted one too. She excels at framing and composition. She's patient and also observant. Max is very internal and reflective. She's smart, but she's not a great student. She's a touch judgmental. She calls herself a geek, an outcast, and a loser, and would probably call herself shy, but it seems more that she's just kind of aloof. She actually talks to people pretty easily and readily, and is pretty good at getting them to open up to her. Some people call her nosy, but that's mostly a meta joke. She wants to be vegan, but just loves bacon too much. Max is very hard on herself. She doesn't think of herself as a good person, and worries that she's just tricking people into liking her. And while there's some truth to that, it's also true that with very few exceptions, everyone seems pleased to see her. She's also a bit indecisive, in part because she spends a lot of time ruminating on consequences. Hold on. This is all helpful context, but I don't think I did this quite right. Alright. Me. Okay. Get set up here properly. Alright. Maxine Caulfield is an ordinary high school senior until one day, when she learns that she possesses a nigh godlike power, the power to reverse time. She can unspool recent events. With the aid of photographs, she can travel even further back in time. She can, with great effort, hold time still and can jump forward to significant events. And the first thing she does when she discovers these incredible powers is fix her camera. She's having a bit of a freak out. But then, she rushes off to use her powers to help someone in need despite the danger, heedless to it. Classic stuff, you'd surely agree. So while Max has become much more extraordinary, the world she exists in has not. It's still a place very much like our own, with the same issues and pressures and problems. It's a cliche to say this is what they would be like in the real world, but Max's world is very much our real world. I mean, just look at what I somewhat cheekily called her rogues gallery. An entitled bully who makes a special target of the most vulnerable. A local drug dealer with boundary issues. A dangerously troubled rich boy whose connections allow him to evade both treatment and consequences. A veteran racked with PTSD who teeters dangerously towards abusive behavior. A cabal of privileged rich kids who run irresponsible parties. Indifferent administrators, indifferent cops, indifferent people, and a predatory man who uses his clout and prestige to get away with horrific abuse. It's a lot. It would probably be a relief for Max to get the chance to face off with a mad scientist or alien conqueror, you know, something simple, clear, and silly. Like, maybe some sort of thief whose crimes all hinge on arcane color puns. I bet Max would really like that. Much more than dealing with all of this. Okay, fine, but why Superman? Well, for one thing, Max doesn't just get called a superhero over and over again. She specifically gets called Super Max. And characters often invoke Superman-related imagery and phrases when they do so. Mostly they aren't being serious, except for Chloe. She quite earnestly believes in Max, but everyone else is being some level of condescending. After all, she doesn't look much like a Superman, but she does earn that appellation. This page is one of Superman's most famous, but that's not the only reason I highlighted it. It's important to note how Max accomplishes this. Her powers aren't the deciding factor. They do help her reach Kate in time, but then they fail her and she can't use them. The great thing about these Superman panels is that he doesn't prevent this tragedy because he catches Regan or freezes a ramp for them to slide down, or shoots a tiny Superman from his hand that catches Regan. He could, though. Max doesn't have that backup. Max has to convince Kate to step away from the edge, and she does it because Max proves she really cares. and everything Supermax needed to prevent this tragedy comes from things she was already doing or would do outside of her powers. She was already social with Kate, she was already concerned, and she naturally took the time to learn about Kate. There are plenty of stories about a superhero being superheroic without their powers, but this just lands differently. It makes those traits of compassion and caring and yearning for real justice central to her persona. In fact, her powers first manifest right when she needs them to save someone, and in double fact, she reaches out to intervene without an inkling that she can do anything, so possibly they manifest specifically because she does need to save someone. And Supermax's very first thoughts are directed towards how her powers will help her save people. This is all very Superman, the instinct to intervene for the needy, the antipathy towards bullies, and Supermax takes her powers very seriously too. Chloe outlines what she could easily do with them, but Max doesn't go through that phase with her powers. She notes in her journal that she needs to be careful as they could be quite dangerous, and outside of some shenanigans, she never really tries to use them for personal gain. She has a generosity that's very much in keeping with the best versions of Superman. That extends really far outward too. Another thing about the best versions of Superman is that most people are happy to see him. He's just a great guy who makes people feel good about themselves, and he's generally pretty likable. He's a sociable superhero who sees the best in people. Max isn't quite that. She has a fair bit of righteous indignation, and she gets pretty peeved at the performative shows of concern for Kate. I think she's right to do so. So it's not like Supermax is all sunbeams and glitter, but for someone who thinks of themselves as an outcast loser, she's pretty good at talking to people. She turns nearly all of her adversaries to her side in some way, or, she has the potential to do that. And it's one thing to sway people like Courtney and Taylor, and even Victoria, but quite another that she's able to sway Frank, which may not be the best idea, but she can do it. Even Nathan Prescott reaches out to her and tries to warn her eventually. And this is all because of the thing that she has most in common with Superman, the motivation. She doesn't just understand that she should try to save everyone. She, like Superman, has the belief that she can.
That's all.
It's tragic. There's another much-beloved panel in All-Star Superman, not as highly regarded as the Regan sequence, but pretty close. It's from issue 6, Funeral in Smallville. Young Clark is visiting the Kent farm on a break from university when a squad of Supermen from the future arrive, tracking this weird monster. They try to keep him from getting involved, but he's Superman, so when things start going bad, he steps in, not realizing what this particular weird monster will take from him until it's too late. And I think the best part of this panel is you can see how dearly Superman believes, to the point that he moves so fast his hair catches fire in an effort to make his belief true. I think Max can relate. When Max has to deal with Frank, she gets to take some small measure of petty revenge. I think that's more than understandable. Her first encounter with Frank was pretty frightening. She probably needs to diminish him a little bit. This scene looks a whole lot like the classic superhero trope of teaching the bully a lesson. You know the drill. The hero has powers, and now they can show the bully they aren't all that. It's pretty fun. Max is reasonably responsible. She doesn't get to indulge in her powers all that often. And I mean, come on, Frank is a shitty drug dealer who threatened a pair of teenage girls with a knife. Some light humiliation is more than called for. Except, Frank won't remember it. He'll never be aware of the power Supermax has, so he will keep doing what Frank does, and she has to work around him. She can't teach the bully a lesson this way. He'll do what he'll do, and she can't control that. And Arcadia Bay did what it did, and she can't change that either. So, Supermax has to also face a doomsday. Doomsday seems to come out of nowhere. The follow-up movie reveals that Darkseid sent him. Apparently it was Mongol in the original. But that isn't even alluded to in Death. He drops onto the heads of people in and around Metropolis, this catastrophe they couldn't foresee, avoid, or prevent. He's an inexplicable disaster, threatening to cut a swath of destruction across the city, one that only Superman could do anything to stop. The storm makes itself known to Supermax before she has even had the chance to manifest her powers in a visceral, terrifying vision. Not to keep ragging on the poor guy, but Doomsday, he looks a bit silly. He's got the goofy radiation suit thing, the ripped up green pants, the faux hawk. It's a little laughable. The Storm does not have that problem. It is terrible, frightening, awe-inspiring, and breathtaking. Both its power and ill intent are instantly apparent. Max earns her appellation, but the storm could only have one name. A raw and relentless force of immeasurable power that someone needed to stop. Where the storm came from is a mystery that is never answered, much like the nature of Supermax's powers. She doesn't have a Professor Quintum or a Star Labs. The closest she has is Warren, and he's a smart kid, but by his own admission, he's still just a high schooler. One of the more charming aspects of the Life is Strangeverse to me is how these kids muddle through their extraordinary and supernatural things happening to them, armed mostly with pop culture. Max spends a lot of time Googling quantum theory and watching time travel movies, and Chloe checks out books on dream symbolism. It's cute, but they don't get a lot of good information. No one does. Even Warren has to frame some of Max's predicaments in terms of quantum leap, and his conclusion doesn't seem to be accurate. Max never learns if her powers come from the Earth's yellow sun, and no one has a clue about the mechanism behind the storm. The best Warren can offer is that chaos theory sure is a thing, but there's no answer, despite Supermax's assumptions regarding who's at fault. She just knows she has to deal with it, that with her godlike powers there must be a way to stop it. She jumps back and forth in time, folds herself into realities within realities, searching desperately for the one thing she knows she can do to stop the storm, to save everyone. In For the Man Who Has Everything by Alan Moore, with art by Dave Gibbons, Superman has to give up his heart's true desire because people need him. Max has to make a very similar sacrifice, and she doesn't hesitate. She feels she's the only one who could have seen this coming, and the only one who could do anything about it. Like I said, it's tragic. The storm is inexplicable and confounding, but anyone could have looked around and known something terrible was coming. Leading up to its arrival, there are not warnings, but omens. Snow falls from a worn sky, the sun is blotted out, birds die, whales flee the sea, but none of it prompts much of a reaction beyond curiosity. Too many people aren't respecting the very apparent signs that something terrible is going on, and the more they ignore them, the more likely it is that things will escalate until they end in tragedy. Supermax is a hero, but she's also very young, which is to say, she's a bit melodramatic and self-centered. Something extraordinary happens to her, something extraordinary happens to the town, and in her mind, there must be a direct line between the two. Everything is her responsibility, because everything is her fault. It's laudable, but not very fair to herself. Chloe calls this thinking a sort of narcissism, and there's a lot of truth in that. The storm is much more complicated than what Warren called clear cause and effect. Which means we need to talk about Rachel. Everyone who isn't Victoria loves Rachel. Everywhere Max goes, someone has something to say about Rachel. Her talent, her coolness, her kindness, her wild side. Rachel casts a long, complex, and sometimes conflicting shadow in Arcadia Bay. By the time Max shows up, Rachel has been missing for 6 months. No one knows what happened to her. Did she run off to LA? Or maybe she ran off to LA? Everyone who isn't Chloe is ready to move on, sure that wherever she ran off to, she must be living it up. That's just Rachel's way. She was always too talented, too luminous for this crummy town. It's not much of a spoiler to say that Rachel did not run off to LA. Her fate feels like a foregone conclusion that Max and Chloe just need to reach. Sometimes Chloe even recognizes that. A big superhero trope is that they're often animated by a loss that impacts their lives and actions, something formative to their persona. You know, Pa Kent, Uncle Ben, the family castle, examples are very numerous. Rachel fits this role for Supermax, but in interesting ways. Supermax resolves to find the truth of what happened to Rachel, but she never meets this one, and Max can't help but feel a little envious of Rachel, and self-conscious about how she thinks she'd compare. Max doesn't think she'd measure up, but it's clear that she's much more like Rachel than she recognizes, to the point she almost shares her fate. Chloe calls the storm Rachel's revenge, and there's a lot of truth in that too. Directly or through some inscrutable chaos theory butterfly chain of events, the storm comes because of Rachel's death. It appears to Max before she's done anything. The omens warning Arcadia Bay that something terrible is coming, they've been going on for months. They're even going on in an alternate reality where the one commonality is that something awful has happened to Rachel. Because the terrible thing is already there. And this begs the question, what is Max really saving everyone from? And in a real sense, it's the consequences of the town's actions. Nathan, with help from Jefferson, murdered Rachel. But the crime of what happened to her had many authors. It took drugs from Frank, and money from the Prescotts, and corruption from the police, and permissiveness and indifference and celebrity, and the desire for prestige, and a status quo that lets men like Jefferson enact their abuse. Wells had to care more about having a fancy name, and Frank had decided it was not a big deal to sell some date-rape drugs. And Sean Prescott had to use his money to shield his son from any consequences for anything he ever did. And a whole lot of people had to choose to do the convenient thing. And so a whole lot of people brought the storm to Arcadia Bay. Get ready to roll your eyes, but we do need to talk about the giant squid in the room. Despite writing some of the best superhero stories, Alan Moore has reservations about them as a concept. He's said they're great for children, but he's wary of people surrendering their own moral authority and agency to be cared for by these figures. So in Watchmen, he portrays them as flawed, broken, dangerous, very unheroic, as a warning against giving over that authority and counting on such people to rescue you. Characters express sentiments like, ahem, the accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up about their waists, and all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, save us. And I'll look down and whisper no. And a live body and a dead body contain the same number of particles. Structurally, there is no discernible difference. Life and death are unquantifiable abstracts. Why should I be concerned? Things that shouldn't really fill you with confidence as to their motives. When you give up your moral agency to a bunch of megalomaniacs like that, don't be surprised when things end badly. And I think Supermax gets at a very similar point in a different way. She has her faults, but she's also exactly what we want a hero to be. Pure of heart and motive, driven to see justice done. So much so, she hurts herself, and seems to have pre-survivor's guilt as a result. In general, when someone like Superman stops someone like Doomsday, it's about restoring the status quo. But what if the status quo brought on the Doomsday? Supermax took flight in response to a broken, exploitative society. If the hero rises because they need to bring about justice with their own hands, can we really expect them to trust that justice will be done through the usual channels? Can we reasonably expect those who suffer under the status quo to want it back? The ideas are similar, but there's a lot of difference worth thinking about between Rorschach and Dr. Manhattan, and when Supermax decides she needs to save who she can, and has to hope that others can find their own way out of the storm like she did. We probably shouldn't let things escalate to the point where there's only one person who has to use some ruthless calculus to make a choice, because at that point, it's really too late to double-check their math. There's a scene everyone loves. Max and Chloe have broken into the school after hours and do some investigating. They find what information they can and start to leave, but Chloe isn't done quite yet. She wants to break into the pool too. And so they do. They splash around, flirt a little, talk about life and stuff. It's pretty lovely. And much later, after the awful truth has been uncovered, I remember thinking, man, I wish we were back in the pool. Endurance is a big trope and theme of superherodom. You see it all the time, how much they can endure and still get back up. Sometimes this theme is very effective. And sometimes it feels a little shoehorned in because everyone realized, oh shit, these stories are supposed to be about something. Superheroes end up going through a lot. And even though it seems negative, that's part of the power fantasy of these characters. It's part of their comfort. There's a reason healing factor is such a common power. And it's a very potent idea. Watching them, we can't help but wonder, what would it be like to always get back up like Superman? I don't think there's a superhero out there who gets back up from more than Supermax. I wasn't joking about the alien conqueror being a relief. After what she endures, it's easy to imagine her reaction.
For apocalypse!
Then again, everyone would laugh at how silly some of these guys are. Anyway, I don't think anyone would want to be Supermax. It's tough to imagine kids donning gray hoodies and messenger bags to run around at recess. What Max endures has florid elements, but it's raw and real and viscerally unpleasant in ways that make the usual superheroic endurance tests seem very silly by comparison. She and Brooke joke about epic battles with supervillains over the bay, but none of her battles turn out like that. Watching what she endures isn't thrilling or exciting, it just feels fucking unfair. Supermax shouldn't have to go through this. Granted, I don't think anyone should be punched to death by a mindless alien monstrosity either, but no decision I make could impact that much. But it's easy to think of a circumstance where a decision I could make would alter the storm's path. And that's why Max is my favorite. Because I don't think we should ask if we can get back up like she does. I think we should ask what we should be doing so Max gets to spend more time in the pool.
obstacles through the blizzard, through the blizzard.